You're listening to Keith Engle, the host of TGI Sports Talk on the National Streaming Sports Roku channel.
Football season is here, and SeatGeek is my go-to for buying tickets. Now with SeatGeek, every single ticket is backed with their buyer guarantee. We've all had plans change, and when you can't make it to the big game, SeatGeek has you covered. They're the only ticketer that allows you to return your tickets ahead of the event for credit with SeatGeek swaps. So when things come up, I know that my tickets won't go to waste. So what are you waiting for? Download the SeatGeek app to maximize your possibilities and shop live events with confidence.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, quick end of the music. Keith Engle here with TGI Sports Talks one-on-one with Keith Engle. Great to have you all with us today. Beautiful. Hopefully it's going to be a beautiful Friday. I think we're going to get some rain this weekend, but the temperatures are going to be going up. Next week, we're going to get a couple of days in the 70s maybe. Yay. Winter might be over. Knock on wood. Wood. What was it? Groundhog? I was going to say woodchuck. I know that's wrong. They look alike. Anyway, I'm going to welcome everybody watching this morning on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. X. We're live on the National Streaming Sports Roku channel. Get that channel downloaded, guys. Lots of great content, 24/7. All my shows are live and replayed on the National Streaming Sports Network. And I'm frozen again, which happens a lot. So, Kevin, bear with me while I have to refresh. Damn, I don't know what's going on. Constant issue with StreamYard lately. I don't know. When we get a guest in, it doesn't seem to happen. So if it happens again, don't get nervous, guys. I'll be right back. I think my audio stays on, if I remember right. Anyway, Roku channel, get on that. The groups that allow me to share, John Gonzalez, the Sports Authorities, the Bottom Line Sports with Flo and the Gang, Let's Talk Sports, Ken Krause at Golf Bud Sports of All Sorts. And, of course, Ralph Williams over at RW Media, who does some great stuff out of Pittsburgh, including the Sports Corner with Smoking Jim Frazier, which I've been a guest on several times and always enjoy myself. DDH, thumbs up to you. And a quick thank you to last week's guest, Mike Westhoff, maybe the best special teams coordinator in the history of football. What a great time we had with Mike last week. And check out his book, Figure It Out. Great book. And next week we'll have Wes Pritchett, defensive star with the 1988 Notre Dame Fighting Irish, our last national championship. Played some years in the NFL, 3 years in the NFL. And we'll have some great stories about that team and Lou Holtz and some other things. Today's guest will be Kevin Bryant, who was a former special agent with the DOD. And we'll talk a little bit about how he went from that to writing a book called, which now I've lost, and hopefully I can bring it back up. Bear with me 1 second, because when I refresh, I lose my screen share, of course, because, nothing can be easy. Here we go. So let me bring up the book before I bring Kevin in. The book is Spies on the Sidelines. I can't read I got to read my own notes here. I believe it's a history of NFL espionage. If I got that subtitle wrong, Kevin can correct me because my eyes are really bad here this morning. In any event, without further ado, let me bring in that author, Kevin Bryant. Good morning, Kevin.
Hey, morning, Keith. How you doing?
What was that subtitle I just screwed up on your book, by the way?
Yeah, so the book's title is Spies on the Sidelines, The High-Stakes World of NFL Espionage.
I figured I don't need to write it down because I'm going to bring up the book, and then I couldn't. It was so small I couldn't read the subtitle, so I apologize. Great book, Kevin. I appreciate you coming in this morning. It's as I talked to you about before we went live. It's a subject that's really exciting to me, interesting to me because of my history as a longtime Patriot fan, some other and backing and actually not being a fan of guys like, even though we're going to talk about the NFL pretty much, the same things apply in college and whatnot. And I defended Jim Harbaugh and some other people in different situations. And I'm interested to get into this topic because I have some very strong opinions about them, and we'll see whether they're true or not. Kevin, let's talk a little bit. I mean, as a younger man, talk about your just your young life and how you got into the sports and how you went from being a special agent at the DOD to writing a book about the NFL and how teams get a competitive advantage. Sure,
absolutely. So, yeah, I've spent more than 20 years working for the Department of Defense. I was a special agent for them, and I was sitting there. I was sitting in Germany at the time when everything with the Patriots was going down. It was actually Spygate 2, I think, which it was called, which is actually with the Broncos when Josh McDaniels went over there. And at that point, I just said, man, I wonder how much of this spying activity really goes on in football and what types of stuff teams, what type of collection activities teams are engaged in to try to get that game day advantage. Mm-hmm. So I just started researching it and spent a lot of time on the internet researching it. Went to go buy a book on it on Amazon and realized that there's nothing out there. And I'd been looking at writing a book for a while and just couldn't find my topic I wanted to write on. And I figured, you know what? With the background I had, I've got a master's degree in intelligence studies. I've been a lifelong football fan. I'm a Broncos fan myself. That I said, you know what? This is kind of I'm going to give this subject a shot and write a book on it. And so that's kind of how the book came about.
And you mentioned, well, you can just touch on this too. You could not just go out and write a book after working for the Defense Department. You had to get clearance, if you will, it wouldn't matter what kind of book you wrote. You would have had to get some clearance from your former employer.
Yeah, there's a screening process that it goes through whenever you want to get published. Haven't had a job like I did. So yeah, it goes through I think 3 or 4 layers of review before
bureaucracy being what it is.
Published, and then you got to address certain concerns if people have it. And sometimes it can be a little bit ridiculous, and you gotta. For instance, in my book, it mentions the word CIA, simply to say that NFL teams are involved in the information gathering business, same as the CIA.
Right.
Well, that was problematic. I had to fight to be able to keep that in there. So sometimes it gets a little ridiculous, but aren't all things in government. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, all things in government are. And I guess, when it comes to national security, if the name Bill Belichick comes up, I guess they'd be concerned about the national security of the country because we all know what an evil person he is. So.
Correct. Right. Absolutely.
He says with sarcasm. So that's interesting. So we know so it was basically, you said it wasn't Spygate 1, which I do want to talk about when we'll get into it. We're going to get into the history of this anyway. But Spygate 2 that inspired you to kind of go down this road.
Yeah, it was. I think just since I was a Broncos fan, hit a little closer to home for me. I had very much been interested in Spygate 1 and followed that quite closely. But I think it was just a matter of timing for me when in my life I had the actual time to sit down and write a book and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. Guys, put up your comments. I'll put some up as irrelevant. Rick, I see your comment, and you and I have debated this for a long time about Harbaugh. We'll talk to Kevin about that at some point here before we let him go. Let's talk about espionage in the NFL to begin with. Is this going on from the beginnings of the league?
Yeah, so absolutely. So really, when you're talking about spying in football, it dates back prior to the NFL. It dates back to college football, right? Which has been around since the 1880s or so. And when the NFL came into existence, that type of activity just continued right along in the professional game. So yes, it has been around since the very beginning.
What were those activities at that point in time, basically, at that early stage?
Well, so what you're talking about is all the types of activity that are still going around today without the technology. Okay. Yep. So So for example, spying on practices of another team. That was very, very big in the earlier years of football. Why? Because, well, teams didn't necessarily have all the security that they do today. Teams today, let's face it, they've got either a wall or a fence or screening, or maybe even an entire stadium that surrounds them, that makes it very difficult for an opponent to get in there and to spy on them. At the beginning of the league, that wasn't necessarily the case. Teams were practicing more or less in an open field area, and they may employ an assistant to be like, hey, if you see anything unusual, I want you to go, talk to these people, or look out for cars that are parked near our field where a person's just sitting in them. That type of activity. Today you've got other types of concerns. Drones, being used to spy on, that type of stuff. You've got to be worried about teams hacking into your networks. So it's much more sophisticated these days compared to what it was in the past.
I think hacking into teams' computers and computer networks is probably taking things too far. But as a rule, from your experience of writing this book, do you see a difference other than the fact that we just have evolved technology-wise? Do you see any difference in what they were doing, 100 years ago, as compared to what they're doing today, just with more sophisticated equipment, as you said a second ago?
So it's real easy to think like, oh, that sounds really too far out. Like that's something that goes on in the world of international espionage, right? Hacking into computers and servers and all this kind of stuff. But it couldn't possibly happen in professional sports. Wrong. So baseball, classic example, right? I think it was with the Astros.
2018 Astros with the buzzers, yeah.
You had a former employee who figured out the password.
Oh, that's so great.
One of his colleagues, and got access to the database that they had on prospective, I think it was draft prospects, and figured out like everything pertaining to that. And he hacked into their servers, like, I think it was like 60 times, something like that. It was lots of times. And so, what teams do for the most part is they're on closed systems. They don't operate for the most part on networks. They operate on standalone systems to ensure that type of stuff doesn't happen. So teams, yes, they're absolutely paranoid about this type of stuff happening because teams and opponents are willing to go that far. And it's amazing how far teams will go to try to get any advantage that they can.
And I'm going to go backwards in a second, but just because we're going down this road, is there a line between getting a competitive advantage and flat out cheating?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's three types of collection that goes on in the NFL. There is permissible collection, meaning this is stuff that the NFL rules and bylaws either permit, they clearly state they permit it, or it's not stated at all and it goes on and it is allowed. There is also stuff that is in the gray, meaning NFL rules and bylaws either permit it or don't discuss it, but it is in a ethically gray area, meaning some coaches will not feel comfortable doing it because they say, hey, it's just not right. And then there is what is in the black, okay? What is not permitted.
Yeah.
And that can even go as far as not only breaking NFL rules and bylaws, it can break U.S. code or U.S. law. And that type of stuff, it does go on.
Hacking into somebody's computer, I would guess, would be some kind of violation of some kind of laws.
For example, using a listening device.
Planning a listening device, you mean,
planning
right?
a listening device and using it to monitor another team's,
Yeah.
conversations.
How about pulling the fire alarm at a team's hotel? Where would that fall?
So, typically that is done by members of the fan base of another team.
Yeah.
But yes, certainly, that obviously breaks a law and is and has been done and will continue to be done.
I joke a little bit because there was a famous meme, I think, when Belichick was and the Patriots was still in their heyday, and they were playing the Steelers, I think, in Foxborough, and the fire alarm got pulled, and there was a meme of Belichick going, if you don't want to get woken up at 3 a.m, just, get home field advantage. You don't have to worry about it. So,
yeah.
I'm going to come back around to obviously Belichick and some other stuff. Going back again to the history of this, is there a team or a individual? Well, we know that this is going on for a long time. Is there somebody that's credited with really being a groundbreaker in this area?
Yeah. So, if you name many of your great coaching legends, they're going to be involved. So George Halas with the Bears, for one. Eubank with the Jets. Al Davis with the Raiders. Al Davis was teams were absolutely paranoid of that guy. And how much he did is still a topic of controversy. But teams were absolutely convinced that he was involved in all these shenanigans. And he did have some, great ones. For instance, one of his assistants, Maurice Schlecker, I believe it was. I'm not quite sure of the pronunciation there. Who was an assistant for the Raiders, for example. He snuck onto a bus when Eubanks was the coach of the Jets. So what he did was he watched a practice that the Jets were having prior to them playing the Raiders, and then after the practice, he snuck onto the bus going back to the hotel to try to listen in on these conversations that were going on and try to pick up any extra little tidbits.
Mm-hmm.
He happened to be caught while he was on the bus on the way back. And he was very lucky that that Eubanks just kicked him off the bus, because I'm sure there were a bunch of players who literally want to kick his butt for trying anything that audacious. But that's the lengths teams are willing to go to, to try to get that extra little advantage.
And you mentioned that some guys might have higher moral standards than somebody else, or ethical standards, I guess, might be a better term. But again, my argument, and we'll jump into the Patriots a little bit here with Spygate 1, where theoretically there's a couple things. So the Patriots have been involved in Spygate 1, where they were accused of, found guilty of taping the sidelines of the Jets and stealing their signals. Well, again, sign stealing has been going on forever. This is just a different level of technology. We had, and I think this one was rebutted, supposedly in the first Super Bowl they played in against the Rams. Won against the Rams. They played in the Super Bowls before. They were accused of taping their pregame preparations, right? Their walkthrough, which again was refuted. It was front page news when it was reported, and it was a retraction like on page 88 of the Globe when that guy retracted, of course. There's Deflategate. Again, my argument has always been, I get it. I'm not necessarily condoning it if we're doing it, but if everybody else is doing it, is the crime that bad? And am I wrong that we should make, that broad a brush. Are the majority of teams, especially the successful ones, doing this or something else to get that advantage?
Yeah, so all teams are involved in collecting information on their opponents, okay? It goes as simple as film study, right? Absolutely. You're looking for tells. You're looking for tendencies of what other teams do.
Mhm.
You're scouring news sources. That can be newspaper, radio, television, to try to figure out certain things, certain tidbits that a player or a coach might let slip, or maybe even footage, right? So in the past, there's been footage of trick plays caught on camera when the news was broadcasting before a big game. And so teams can figure out little tidbits from that. So all of that is permissible. All the teams do this type of stuff. Then you get into things that are questionable, right? That other teams are not going to feel comfortable. That some teams do feel comfortable, other teams don't. Such as talking to players before a game, right? Asking them, hey, Steve, I know you used to play for the Patriots, who were just about to play. Okay, you played for them last year. I want you to give me a rundown of what all their offensive hand signals look like that you know. Some coaches are going to feel comfortable with that. Some players are going to feel like, okay, I'll do that. And some are going to be like, yeah, I'm not going to rat out my former team. Man, that's just, I don't feel comfortable with it. Okay. And then you're going to have stuff that's clearly in the black that NFL rules and bylaws do not permit, that some teams are willing to do and others aren't.
Videotaping the sideline, for instance.
Right. So what I will tell you is that through the history of the NFL, a lot of teams that are winning Super Bowls, they're willing to go there. A lot of teams.
Not just one.
What?
Not just one.
Not just one. No. I mean, this goes out through the history of the league, right? And so it's not only a matter of how well you're willing to collect information, though. It also goes into how well do you defend your information, okay? Because lots of teams are willing to try to take measures that are morally questionable and beyond. But a lot of teams really don't do a great job of protecting their information, which becomes very problematic. What I will say about the Patriots, so let's get in there for a quick second. So the Patriots, of course, with Spygate, their activities now, collecting signals on other opponents is permissible. Teams are allowed to do that. All teams try to do that. Now, there are rules about how it can be done. And filming another team's signals during a game are not permitted. Okay, so were the Patriots in violation? Yes. Okay, they did something wrong. Okay, that's clear. How many other teams do it? Other teams do. There's no doubt.
It's always been my point.
I mean, coaches have come out and said, after Spygate, that, yeah, we were involved in this. We did the same thing before. So it does take place. What the Patriots did better than anyone else, though, was how do you use that information to your advantage? Okay, so it wasn't just taping signals. It was you tape the signals and then you coordinate that with talking to a player, okay, who used to play for that team, and saying, Steve, okay, we have these signals that are taped from the other team, and we're about to play this team. We have the signals from last season or from earlier in the season when this team played. I want to know, is this signal right here that I'm going to show you on the screen, is it still valid to the best of your knowledge? Okay. Or they may text to Steve before the game and say, hey, I want a rundown of all these signals. And then they look and see, okay, the day before the Patriots were about to play them, we're going to try to find these signals being used and verify, are they still valid? And so the Patriots would use 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of intelligence gathering to confirm and to vet the information that they had. And so it ended up being a really, really effective way for them to gather information and to confirm what they had. Other teams around the league were not nearly as sophisticated. Some coaches would go, you know what? We have this information, but I don't know if I can trust it. And they just let it go at that. And they ended up not using the information at all because they go, I don't really know if this signal that we collected, is it still even going to be valid? The Patriots said, yeah, no, we have ways to be able to do all this. We're going to confirm it. We're going to go after this. And they were very, very good at what they did there.
So again, we don't, and again, similar to steroids and whatnot, right? We don't know who did it and who didn't. We can assume many of their opponents were doing the same thing based on your own research. And it sounds like what you're saying is they did it better. They made better use of the information, which is why probably other teams got upset. Now, I've always had it thrown in my face too that, well, I said, not because I said they just did it better than other teams. And well, they got caught. So how much better could they have been? And my argument was any team that's doing it, if the NFL sets their sights on them, could find evidence and they'd be in trouble as well if they wanted to for this or something else.
Yeah, the really interesting thing about Spygate is so recording other teams' signals when the Patriots started all of this.
Yeah,
it was permissible. There was no rule or bylaw that said you could not do that, and other teams were doing it as well. Now, teams started complaining about the Patriots doing it, and as a result, the NFL sent out 2 different memos saying this is no longer allowed. Now,
what year was that? Do you know the year roughly?
Oh, geez. No, it was like a couple years before all of Spygate broke.
Okay. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah. So, and so even there, like I would question, okay, it's not in NFL rules and bylaws, even today.
Right.
It's just in a memo. Is that really like, I mean, that's, I don't know how, I mean, I get the NFL obviously enforces it, but if I was a coach that had been caught doing that, I'd be like, hey, there's no, you don't have this in a rule or a bylaw, but the NFL used that to punish the Patriots. And at that point, there is the question of after those memos went out, did any other teams engage in continuing to do that type of collection? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure anyone knows the answer to that other than, perhaps a handful of coaches that were, still involved in that type of activity, which very likely could have gone on. But that's where some pundits and obviously fans will go, no, the Patriots continued to go, went further than what other teams were doing and did break, NFL policy, at least.
But based on your research, did they do more or were they just better? Because you talked about this before. Were they just better at using that data to give themselves a competitive advantage? Were they better or did they do more?
Yes and yes. So I'll give you an example. Okay. So the Patriots, they use so many different methods to gather all this information, which is what really made them effective. So for example, when teams were traveling to Foxborough to play, they actually managed to know what players from opponents were not on the flights. So, one of the big things is that you always want to know is what injured players are not going to be playing. And teams try to keep that very hush-hush.
Mm-hmm.
So what that really means is that either the Patriots had someone at the airport watching to see who was and who wasn't getting on flights, or They had someone inside of the airport, like an airline employee, who could actually tell them who had and who did not have a ticket. And, those are the extents that the Patriots were willing to go to. I mean, they would go through, just these crazy, use all these methods to try to get any little advantage that they could. And it made them very, very effective.
So again, I guess I probably asked this question. I'm going to ask it in a little different way. We don't know who did things. The NFL knows who did things. Guaranteed they know probably everybody who was involved in whatever shenanigans they might have been doing. I said this about the Patriots a couple of different times. I've said it about Jim Harbaugh in Michigan last year, that when it comes to these types of things, there is selective enforcement of whatever, whether they're rules or whether they're suggestions or whatever we might want to call them. A memo went out. There's selective enforcement, and if I want you, I'm going to get you.
Yeah, I mean, that is true to an extent. I mean, I have some examples in the book of areas where teams were clearly engaged in nefarious activity, and the NFL did not punish them. Can you
give me a couple of those, by the way, real quick?
Sure. There have been assistants, especially when you're talking about, back in the history, the older days of the NFL. There was one assistant who climbed up in a tree and watched another team's practice, and he got caught doing it. The other team, they saw him do it, and they reported this to the NFL, and the NFL was like, yeah, okay. They didn't punish him. You take the example earlier I gave you. You've got a Raiders assistant on the bus of another team. NFL didn't do anything with it. So this type of stuff goes on all the time where, teams are, they're known to be engaged in this type of stuff, and they just don't decide to punish them. Obviously, when you're like the Patriots and you're winning Super Bowls with all of this, and you won multiple, and teams are just like, look, there's got to be something going on. And then you get that smoking gun. Oh, yeah, they are. Look, they're doing all this type of stuff. Then it becomes problematic, and the league obviously gets pushed. There's that, if the league sits on it, then the NFL fan base goes, hey, you're just doing nothing, and you're letting the Patriots win Super Bowl after Super Bowl, even though they're cheating. And so that becomes problematic for the league because, let's face it, the league's all about money, right? They want to generate revenue. And if they tick off their fan base, then they're losing money. So that becomes very problematic for them. Does that come into play and become something that the NFL commissioner and the top brass have to take into account when they're making these types of decisions? Yes, absolutely. Having said that, on the other end, okay, were there things that the Patriots were doing at the time that did not get investigated because the NFL didn't necessarily want to fully expose how far things had gone? Yes, that took place as well. Because I will tell you one of the interesting things that the Patriots were accused of doing, and that some of their former assistants stated matter-of-factly that took place, was sneaking an employee into other teams' locker rooms before games to look for paperwork that could help them out, including those plays that are scripted, like the first 10, 15 plays that are scripted by other teams. And that they said, actually some assistants said from the Patriots that the most effective thing when it came to spying on opponents was not stealing signals. It was collecting those plays before games. And so, it's very difficult to say, it's easy to say, the league, took it hard on the Patriots. It's also easy to say that the league didn't go far enough. So you have both sides of the coin there that are argued.
So I haven't finished your book. So just to take this a little step further with the league, and it's kind of germane, especially to, what we listen to about the NFL today and the scripting of games by the league, and referees told to let Patrick Mahomes get call roughing the passing on Mahomes more than other players. And yeah. I don't buy any of that, by the way. Do you think that the league let this stuff go to allow the Patriots to have an advantage because they wanted the Patriots to win, or other teams, I guess? Do you think that went that far?
No, I don't at all. I don't believe that. I think, like I said, the NFL is a business. So any type of Spygate was bad news for the NFL.
Agreed.
Okay. And they wanted to have this thing open and shut as soon as possible. So when it came to Spygate, the punishment for Spygate was issued before any investigation by the NFL was actually conducted. The NFL, so how the punishment went down was,
that's not the only time, by the way, with the Patriots that no investigation was done before.
Right. Yeah. So Roger Goodell called Belichick and said, "Hey, did you do this?" And Belichick said, "Yeah, we did it. And I think we were perfectly within our right to do it." And Goodell said, "Yeah, I disagree." And end the conversation. Then the punishment comes out. Then NFL investigators are sent to Foxborough to actually go and see what took place, how much of it, what tapes do the Patriots have. And then they said, "That's good. We're done." Now, teams had been accusing the Patriots of many things over years and years and years. All of that stuff, none of it was investigated. Okay? Because the NFL doesn't want it out there. It's bad news. And the NFL has a security section. Okay? And their sole job is to make sure that any type of scandal is squashed as soon as possible, and to, above all, to make sure that it does not come out in the news, if possible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if it does come out in the news, to deal with it as quietly as possible. So that's the NFL's MO. So there is going to be shady stuff that goes on that the NFL quickly and secretly just tries to address, because they don't want fans to go, "Oh, this game is rigged. The NFL is rigged, and we don't want any," because when you talk about, Patrick Mahomes, being protected more than other quarterbacks, that ticks off the fan base. And they say to a certain percentage of fans are going to go, "I'm done. I'm just done watching the games because I believe this whole thing's rigged." And it costs the NFL money.
It seems to be a huge percentage, if you pay attention to social media, that people think these games are rigged. Why they watch, I wouldn't know. I don't think they are, because I think there's a big difference. And I know it's not necessarily germane to your book, but I think there's a big difference between bad officiating and fixing and scripting games. I think there's a huge gap between those two things.
That's a really interesting topic. That's easy to say. And I think that's what most people would believe. I think you're correct. And I don't think there's necessarily a NFL scripted. I don't believe that the NFL scripts it. Okay. I don't think they say, "Hey, Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl this year." Now, what I will say is, when it comes to the effects of gambling.
Another question, correct?
Right, on the league. You take professional soccer, which is actually worldwide worth a lot more money than the NFL is, okay? It has already been known that hundreds and hundreds of games, I'm talking modern games, like recent, within the last 5 to 10 years, referees have been paid off to make sure that a team won, or to make sure that a team won or lost by a certain amount, right? To hit, because obviously people aren't just betting on who wins and losses. People are betting on to what degree, by how much do teams win or lose, right? And so that's already been known to take place in professional soccer, English Premier League, Champions Leagues games, all of that stuff. So has it taken place in the NFL? Well, I mean, we already know that the mob has been involved in the past of trying to affect NFL games.
Back to 1969 and the Jets, so the rumors were there, right?
Right. So to think that, okay, it's people have tried to affect games, and to think that it hasn't taken place, I think is probably pretty naive.
Yeah, I would never say it's never happened. I'd say it's not the norm is all.
So I mean, that becomes the question: is how much does it take place? To what extent? Let's face it, every game has bad calls. Do those bad calls take place because it's simply human error, or do they take place because someone's been paid off?
Yeah.
That's always the interesting question. And it's tough to know.
And you mentioned this before, since gambling's always been a big part of sports, obviously, right? We'd be naive not to think that. Well, we have point spreads, and there's no other reason to have point spreads. But since, to me, this whole scripting and fixing of game conversations, and there is a great hysteria for it on social media. It's crazy. This last year really got out of control. I'd go to some of these groups and see what they're talking about. The direct correlation to the leagues getting in bed with gamblers, basically DraftKings and all these other gambling sites that they promote and they're in bed with. Yeah. To me, they've opened this Pandora's box to let people believe what they think their own reality is reality because of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think to a certain degree, the NFL's kind of shot themselves in the foot.
Exactly.
By promoting all this, by promoting gambling and betting. And so, yeah, absolutely. So the NFL does try to take steps to try to ensure that games are not impacted. For example, the NFL security has employees whose function is really to try to make sure that this type of stuff doesn't happen. If there's a big swing in betting lines before a game, the NFL will investigate that. They'll look into, hey, why did this take place? To try to make sure that it's for a reason. Oh, news came out that a key player was injured. Okay, that affected the betting line. But they want to make sure that the betting line didn't just switch because of nefarious activity that's taken place behind the scenes. And so, I mean, the NFL does go to great extent. They will question, they'll if they need to investigate players or coaches because of this type of stuff, they will. And one of the things that is not permitted is for NFL members, whether it's staff members or players, they can't bet on games in the NFL. And when that does take place, NFL players are either heavily fined or they're suspended for a while. The NFL, they crack down hard on that because they don't want to they don't want that perception that games are tainted to be out there. Yeah.
Danny's got a great point here too. And good morning, Danny. As far as he knows, it hasn't happened. But he says one official can definitely change a game, which is absolutely true. But that's different than the NFL, condoning it or backing it or sanctioning it. But I would say, we mentioned before, we'd probably be naive to think that some official hasn't in some way been coerced into trying to make a game go one way or the other in the NFL, Major League Baseball, whatever you want to talk about.
Right. Yeah. No, when it comes to officials, I think absolutely. I mean, has the Super Bowl been determined by a ref who was paid off? I would think surely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When, what one, no idea. But there's enough of an impact from betting, gambling, the mob in professional sports that, yes, I absolutely am fairly confident that that's taking place.
Yeah.
Does
And I
the
want
NFL, do I think the NFL has ever scripted it? I would doubt it. And the reason I would say that is because if that ever came to light, that's the end.
Yeah.
People are just
You're
going to be
done.
like, okay, we're done with this. This is over. And I think it's just too high of a risk for
They're
the
not
NFL.
going to risk a multi-billion-dollar business by doing that. And I want to get back to the intelligence gathering and that type of thing in a second. But just to finish this up, I do think Danny's talking about full-time officiating. I think it would really benefit the NFL to have full-time officials who are more efficient at their job and would take away some of this, hysteria that we hear about this topic in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And paying them well. That's another key thing, right? Because if you're going to pay officials, let's say a salary of $60,000 a year, right? Because they're not they're not super highly paid. That obviously, then you got to worry about, okay, are they willing to throw a game because they don't have enough money,
Agreed.
To live, especially in any high cost area where these games are played. Let's face it, the games are all played in high cost areas. So, and these guys got to live near a major airport. So they're probably living in major cities. That's an issue. If you pay your refs, let's say $150,000, $200,000 a year, okay, now we're fairly comfortable. We feel like, you know what, there is not nearly as much of a threat. And I think the league, especially as much money is out there.
Exactly.
And there's a ridiculous amount of money in the NFL. They need to make sure they're paying these guys well enough that this isn't a worry and a concern.
100%. They're making money hand over fist. There's zero reason not to eliminate this whole conversation in my mind. Let's go back. I want to get back to the whole stealing signs and whatnot. Rick brings up, and has anyone figured out how to get inside the helmet of the offense and defensive play calling? You talked about hacking into computers earlier. I would think this is something that's at least been attempted, if not accomplished.
Right. So absolutely, that has been done. Actually, so headsets there have been two headset periods in the NFL. The first one was when it first came out, okay, under Paul Brown, obviously legendary coach of the Cleveland Browns. He was the first one to use this technology. And the actual reason that the NFL stopped using headset technology for, I think it was more than a decade after that, was because another team figured out that, you know what, if we just scan the radio signals, we can pick this up and intercept it and then listen in on everything, which is exactly what an opponent did. And so the Browns went to the NFL and the commissioner at the time and said, hey, this team cheated. They're doing this. And then the commissioner was stuck with a big decision. Okay, how do we prevent this? And how do we make sure that the headset technology, if it's used, is safe? And the NFL really didn't have any good answers. And so what they said is just, hey, no one's using headsets. Right. And that went on for a decade before the NFL really could figure out how do we go about protecting it. And so that was instance one, where another team surely figured out. Now, there has always been questions of how well are other teams able to listen in on headsets? And this was a big question with the Patriots, who were accused of doing exactly this. And so it's not just a matter of listening in on headsets. So previously, the security that was used with headsets was good, but not great. In today's modern game, teams are using military level encryption with their headsets, which is nearly impossible to crack. Okay, having said that, unless you have the password. Okay, because if you have the password, all that encryption does nothing for you. Okay, because if you know what frequency the teams are going to be on and whatnot, and know how to hack in, then you can still listen in. Now, that would be extremely difficult to get. But if you're going into an NFL team's locker room before the game, you may be able to find not only the first 10 to 15 scripted plays before a game, you might be able to find out exactly what channel they're going to be operating on and any associated passwords to be able to use with that encryption. Has that taken place? That's a very good question. I don't know. Having said that, it is much easier, instead of listening in, to simply make it so teams can't listen in to their own headsets.
Didn't we have this happen? Almost this. I feel like it was this season that
it happens all the time.
Somebody had like the game broadcast going into their headsets instead of the coaching staff or something. Absolutely. I'm not sure if I got that right.
Every year there are instances where teams, they can't receive, they can't effectively communicate between coach and the player on the field. And that can be just normal distortion. In some areas and stadiums have more distortion than others. But are there ways to be able to actually affect that are, kind of a bit of skullduggery, a bit of trickery and cheating? Yes, absolutely. That it's not that tough to do. It really isn't. To block a signal is not very hard. To intercept a signal, very, very complicated. You need very smart guys. You need equipment, all this type of stuff. But to block a signal is pretty basic. And the chances of getting caught doing that, not nearly as likely. So there have been things that have gone on, and the Patriots have been accused of this, of blocking signals. And there is a bit of evidence that is out there that, yeah, the Patriots probably did that in the past. Now, have other teams done it? Yes, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it's one of those, cat and mouse games. And then teams will tell the NFL, hey, our signals are being blocked. We think the other team's doing it. The NFL will go to investigate. The other team says, no, we're not doing this. Sometimes, there's been instances, for example, where a team will complain about it. The officials will go talk to that team. Everything starts working again. And then 10 minutes later, everything's not working once the officials leave the sidelines again. And so there's a lot of questions out there. Yeah, I think this is one of the things that absolutely does take place. The NFL does have some good rules that if one team is having headset communication problems, that both teams have to can't use headsets. However, there's that 10 or 15 minutes before the officials can go and hold these conversations and all whatnot, that it does give one team an advantage. And so, yeah.
Well, just to offset Danny's Patriots comment here, which again, there's no way to have this conversation without talking about the Patriots because they've been the most obvious team. But my question is going to be this, and we can include the Patriots in this comment. All the teams that have been, we looked at it kind of dynasties in different eras, right? The Patriots, before them, the 49ers in the 80s and 90s, Joe Gibbs Redskins, the Steelers and Cowboys in the 70s, Lombardi's Packers, the Dolphins, Shula around the 70s.
Yeah.
These teams that were winning and winning consistently. The Raiders, you mentioned already. Do any of these other teams stand out as teams that were doing things? And we only have about 5 minutes left, but And if they were, and we'll include the Patriots in this comment, in your comment, does the things that they were doing to get a competitive advantage in any way diminish their accomplishments based on other people trying to do the same things?
Yeah. I mean, maybe yes, to a certain degree. I think that it's to what degree is really the question, right? So what I found during my research of the book is that a lot of big name coaches, a lot of those teams that were winning Super Bowls, especially dynasties that you're talking about, were involved in some of this, in some of these, shenanigans. You talk about the Packers, who were, the Packers and Bears back in the day, right? That was, with Lombardi and all that, and George Halas.
Yeah.
Obviously, those were dynasty teams for a while. And so you've got stuff like there was stuff going on there, such as, I know George Halas was accused of sneaking in towel boys, which were at that time provided by the home team, having the towel boys report on all the conversations that were taking place in the other team's locker room, and then coming back to him and telling him, hey, okay, they're halftime adjustments. This is what they're planning on doing. This is what they're going to do. So, I mean, absolutely, all of this type of stuff has gone on in the past. And generally what I found is the teams that are winning more are more likely to be engaged in this type of activity. Absolutely. Does it diminish their wins? So what I found is I love this stuff.
Now, to be clear, before you answer this, we are talking about more champions than just the Patriots.
Oh,
does it diminish their account? Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Just want to clarify for my
110%. So what I found is I actually love this stuff. I love that teams are doing it. I love that, I think it adds a bit of a great story, some comedy at times. I mean, some of this stuff is just hilarious. Some of the stuff that goes on, the creativeness that comes into it. I love it. But others are going to say, teams are cheating. Is that the case? Are they breaking rules and bylaws at times? Yeah, they are. I can't deny it. But that's like saying, in the world of international espionage, that, it shouldn't be taking place. And, are people arrested because of it? Absolutely. Is it going to stop happening? No. Why? Because it's too important. It has too big of an effect. It's the same thing in sports. So, it's, I think if you're willing to pay the price, go for it. It may cost you draft picks. It may cost you an asterisk next to your Super Bowl win. Yeah. If the NFL really wants to tamp down on stop this stuff, they can. They can simply make the punishment so severe that NFL teams are not willing to go beyond what is allowed. But the fact is, the NFL doesn't. Right. And I think the $1 million question is why. And I think, I think they're just willing to say, you know what? It's just not that. It's not a big enough a deal that we're going to make, that we're going to make this, we're going to make our punishment so severe to completely stop it. And I think they're right. I think it adds a little something, and I like it. I enjoy it. I think it makes some great storylines.
I agree. We're going to wrap up here in a second, but there's a couple of comments I want to put up here real quick. I'm going to say goodbye to the Roku audience. I know we're going to lose them at 10 o'clock, and we're just going to go a couple minutes over, not too far. But there's a couple of things I had to get to. There's a couple of questions for you, but one comment I got to make, Rick. Billy hasn't been right all these years, because if you listen closely, go back to listen to the tapes. I never said they didn't do anything. I said everybody else was doing it, and that's always been my argument is,
Yeah. So I would say,
I think we've backed that up a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that all teams are doing it. It's stuff that breaks NFL rules and bylaws. What I would say is that There is a long, long history of that in the NFL. And at any time, a certain percentage of NFL teams are going to be involved in that.
You know, this is a great question Rick has here, by the way, based on your last question about how you enjoy it a bit, right? If you were to be hired by the NFL, would you rather be hired by the NFL to find cheaters or to by a team to help them gather competitive intelligence?
So I think there's a big opportunity for both. And what I saw in my research is a lot of teams have a bunch of amateurs trying to do this, trying to collect information and trying to protect information. Yeah. And so I think all teams would benefit from having people doing both, and not just the stuff that's not permissible, the stuff that is permissible, because they just don't do it well at times. Okay. And it does make a very big difference. So to get an example of how far teams are willing to go to protect information, Mike Shanahan, when they're playing against the Packers in the Super Bowl, Shanahan was very worried about the practice field because there was a big hill that overlooked it. And what he did was he hired a bunch of Navy SEALs to secure that hilltop, to make sure that no one could put a spy up there to be able to look on them, to be able to look at those practices. And so, that's the extent that teams that are winning Super Bowls are willing to go to. Teams that are losing are going to go, yeah, you know what? I don't think that much stuff happens. Or even if it does, I don't think it's that effective. That is the mentality of teams that lose consistently, and they need to hire people.
Exactly.
And they don't.
So to Rick's question, though, I think is more about you. Which side would you rather be on? If you were offered a job, which side would you rather be on? Catching the cheaters or helping teams? I'm not going to say cheat. I'm going to say helping teams gather.
I would rather help teams gather, and not necessarily in the sense that to help them cheat, but there's so much stuff that could be professionalized in how teams gather information that could be done better. Let's just take going through the media and seeing what's out there, what little secrets you can find out there.
Yeah.
A lot of coaches go, okay, you found this in a newspaper article, but I don't know if I can trust it, and so I'm not going to use it. What I would do is to say, you know what? This information came from this coach or from this reporter, and you have to go and assess how often is information provided by them actually accurate over the years. You have got to rate all that stuff. And it's a long and complicated thing that requires spreadsheets. It requires a bunch of time. It requires analysis. Instead of just going, I don't know. That's something that can be done and be done well. But for most teams, they're just simply not willing. They don't have the expertise, and they're not willing to spend the effort to do it well. And that goes through all the different types of collection that are out there.
I want to go back. One last question. We're going to wrap it up. We'll push your book one more time and talk about maybe a future book a little bit. We don't know whether that's going to happen, but actually, two questions. Your feelings on Bountygate. Another thing that I think, again, was probably going on a lot more than just with the Saints at that time. Maybe they took it to another level, and it was certainly high profiles. What are your thoughts on Bountygate and were the fines handed out there too soft? And again, something that was prevalent, in your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, the penalties that came down for Bountygate were pretty severe. And I feel rightfully so. They should be. So, the NFL never goes to they rarely go to a super extreme of saying, hey, this coach is never going to coach again because this player can never play again. It can happen. It has happened in the past, but it is very rare. I think when you're talking about encouraging your players to hurt the opponents on another team, especially to offer financial rewards for it, that's pretty egregious, man. That's just it's pretty dirty. Right. And so obviously a severe penalty was absolutely called for. I don't think there's any place in the game for it. Now, having said that, were other teams doing it? Has it gone on throughout the history of the league? Yes, probably.
So Buddy Ryan, it seems to be a open secret that Buddy Ryan used to do these things all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I played NCAA soccer, and I will tell you, even at the NCAA level for soccer, absolutely just trying to injure another player to get him out of a game. You see it in the English Premier League all the time. That absolutely happens. Players play dirty. And if they can get away with it, they do. You look at just what goes on in the bottom of a dog pile, when there's a fumble. They're absolutely dirty things going on to try to recover that football. I'll tell you that. Right. They will do just about anything to get that ball back. So, it's not surprising to me that coaches encourage, that type of stuff.
Great stuff. I'm going to put this comment up. We've kind of touched on it. We know the stuff goes on the college level. We talked about Harbaugh a little bit, but I'll put this up in the context of potentially there's another book in your future on the college level of this. And I know that you've said that, due to your personal situation and spending time with your daughter and whatnot, as she grows towards leaving the nest, this might be put on hold. But if it comes out, will this cover I'm sure it'll cover things like we talked about here. Again, it's sign stealing. Basically, it's the same premise as some other things we've talked about, but we'll also cover other recruiting violations and things like that. Or how deep will that go? Should you go down that road?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to cover a lot of the same subjects, but the interesting thing is, so the rules in college football are different. So, for example, advanced scouting. So in the NFL, teams can send advanced scouts to go watch the games of their upcoming opponents, and that takes place. Well, in college football, by and large, advanced scouting is not allowed. And so you end up with the Michigan spy scandal, right? Which just recently, where you have Connor Stallions, an assistant in Michigan, involved in this. And so what does he do? One, he attended some games himself, which is very risky, okay? Because if he's seen, it can obviously bring up a lot of questions. So you have things like, okay, how do we get around it then? Well, Connor Stallions paid for some of his friends to go to the games. And so what is he obviously doing? He's paying for them to go to the games, guys that know about football, to come back and provide scouting reports to him. And furthermore, you've got him coordinating with other schools to share signals that they know about other teams, which also goes on in the NFL.
Right.
By the way,
right.
Teams are absolutely willing to play. Hey, you're about to play the Giants. We're about to play the Jets. Why don't we switch what we know about these teams, and we share whatever advantage we can possibly get, and it can help out, especially for coaches that have a background together. If two coaches, both came from the 49ers in a background, and since they've moved on from there, but they're still buddies, they're still friends, they still communicate. That type of thing goes on all the time in the NFL. It also goes on all the time in college football. So yeah, there are differences between the game, between college and the NFL, some of which are quite significant. And so, yeah, the book would absolutely address those. I think that's really what makes it very interesting, as well as, a longer history. College football has been around since the 1880s. It has a much, much longer history than the NFL. And so there's way more stories in addition, and you have more teams.
Right.
So with more teams come more stories, which absolutely I think will add to the interest there.
Well, I, for one, look forward to finishing up. And it's funny that I couldn't get the title because they got it right in the banner here, for crying out loud. Spies at the Sidelines, the high-stakes world of NFL espionage. I look forward to finishing this, and I look forward to, at some point, your next book coming out about college football as well. So guys, get this. You can get it on Amazon. I'm sure there's plenty of other places you can get it. I did put it on my Kindle here recently. So there's lots of places to get that. Kevin, I want to thank you for coming on today and hang out. If you can hang on for a second, I'll say a proper goodbye to you once we wrap it up here. And thanks so much. Great insight and a topic that's close to my own heart, as you can see from some of the comments. So
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Keith.
Great to have you. Guys, I'll see you Sunday with the Sunday True Consciousness, 8:30 a.m. I'll be on at 8 o'clock that morning with the big football show on National Streaming Sports. We'll see you then. Keith Engle 101. I thank Kevin Bryant. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Keith Engle, the host of TGI Sports Talk on the National Streaming Sports Roku channel.